Senior Airman Jessica Chen had been staring at the same weather report for the past 20 minutes, watching the storm system crawl across her radar screen like a massive gray beast. The numbers didn't lie. Winds gusting to 45 knots, visibility dropping to near zero, and lightning strikes occurring every few seconds. It was the kind of weather that grounded everything with wings. "Chen, you're still here?" Master Sergeant Rodriguez appeared beside her workstation, coffee mug in hand. The control tower at Kandahar Airfield buzzed with its usual controlled chaos, but Jessica had noticed the subtle shift in energy. The kind that happened when bad weather rolled in, and everyone started getting nervous. "Someone needs to monitor the approach patterns, Sergeant," Jessica replied, not taking her eyes off the screen. "That C-130 from Bagram is still showing as inbound. And this storm is moving faster than predicted." Rodriguez glanced at her screen and frowned. "Hercules 27? They should have diverted by now. Weather's been calling for severe conditions for the past hour." Jessica pulled up the flight's information. Captain Mike Sullivan's crew had been running medical supplies to forward operating bases for the past 6 months. She'd guided them in dozens of times, and Sullivan was one of the most experienced C-130 pilots in theater. But even experienced pilots had limits. "Their alternate is Kabul, but that's reporting similar conditions," Jessica said, scrolling through the meteorological data. "And they've got critical medical supplies on board, blood products and emergency surgical equipment for the field hospital." "Not our call, Chen. That's up to the pilot and operations." Rodriguez's tone carried the weight of military protocol. But Jessica caught something else there. Concern. Maybe even doubt. The radio crackled to life. "Kandahar Tower. Hercules 27. Requesting updated weather and approach information." Jessica reached for her microphone, but Rodriguez's hand stopped her. "Let Henderson handle it. You're still too new for this kind of weather." Jessica bit back her response and watched as Staff Sergeant Henderson, a 15-year veteran, took over her station. She'd been working air traffic control for 8 months now, had guided everything from small reconnaissance drones to massive cargo planes through dozens of approaches, but apparently that wasn't enough when things got difficult. "Hercules 27, Kandahar Tower." Henderson's voice was steady and professional. "Current conditions are winds 270 at 35 gusting to 45. Visibility 1/4 mile in heavy rain and fog. Recommend divert to alternate." The response came back immediately. "Kandahar Tower, Hercules 27. We're carrying critical medical supplies, and our fuel state is getting tight. Requesting approach vectors for runway 29. Henderson glanced at Rodriguez, who shook his head firmly. "Hercules 27, negative on approach clearance. Weather is below minimums. You need to divert." There was a longer pause this time. When Captain Sullivan's voice came back, Jessica could hear the strain. "Kandahar Tower. We've got wounded soldiers from that IED attack this morning. They need the blood products we're carrying, and our alternate is reporting similar conditions. We need to try." Jessica studied her weather displays more carefully. The storm was massive, but it wasn't uniform. She could see gaps in the precipitation, brief windows where visibility might improve just enough for an experienced crew to make it work. Her fingers moved across her keyboard, pulling up wind shear data and comparing it with the approach path for runway 29. "Henderson," Rodriguez said quietly. "Tell them to hold at their current position while we assess options." But Jessica was already running calculations in her head. The wind direction was creating a crosswind that would be challenging but not impossible for a C-130. The rain was the bigger problem. But the radar showed the heaviest precipitation cell would pass in about 15 minutes. If they could time it right, "Sergeant Rodriguez," Jessica said, turning from her screen. "What if we could sequence them for approach during a brief break in the precipitation?" Rodriguez gave her a look that mixed patience with exasperation. "Chen, this isn't a training exercise. We don't take chances with aircraft and crew lives to prove points." "I'm not trying to prove anything, Sergeant. I'm looking at the data." Jessica pulled up her analysis on the large display screen. "Look at the precipitation cell movement. In approximately 12 minutes, we'll have a window of maybe 5 minutes, where visibility should improve to 3/4 of a mile. Still challenging, but within the crew's capabilities, if we vector them perfectly. Common. Henderson studied the display. That's cutting it awfully close, Chen. What if your timing is off? Then we tell them to execute a missed approach and hold until conditions improve or they divert. Jessica's voice was steady, but she could feel her heart racing. This was the kind of moment that defined careers, and she was still too junior for anyone to listen to her. The radio crackled again. Kandahar Tower, Hercules 27. We're showing heavy fuel consumption due to headwinds. Need to start our approach soon, or we'll have to declare a fuel emergency. Rodriguez closed his eyes for a moment. Fuel emergencies changed everything. They couldn't simply tell a crew to keep holding when they were running out of options. Henderson, clear them for approach, Rodriguez ordered. But Henderson was studying Jessica's weather analysis. And something in his expression had changed. Sergeant, what if Chen's right about the timing? If we can bring them in during that window? Henderson, your senior controller, make the call. Staff Sergeant Henderson had been doing this long enough to know when the book answer might not be the right answer. He looked at Jessica's data one more time, then at the determination in her eyes. Chen, he said quietly, walk me through your approach plan. Jessica felt a surge of adrenaline. This was her chance. The key is precise timing and radar vectors. We start them on approach vectors now, but keep them at holding altitude until the precipitation cell passes. The moment we see improvement in visibility, we clear them for final approach with very specific heading corrections to compensate for the crosswind. And if the weather doesn't cooperate, then we execute a missed approach immediately. The C-130 has excellent climb performance, even with a full load. Henderson nodded slowly. Rodriguez, she's got a point. That crew knows their aircraft better than anyone. And Chen's timing analysis looks solid. Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, weighing protocol against practicality. Finally, he made his decision. Henderson, you maintain primary control. Chen, you monitor weather and timing. The moment conditions deteriorate beyond what you've predicted, we abort. Jessica felt her pulse quicken as Henderson keyed his microphone. Hercules 27, Kandahar Tower. We're going to attempt an approach during a brief break in weather conditions. Expect vectors for runway 29 in approximately 10 minutes. Be advised, this will require precise flying and immediate compliance with all heading and altitude instructions. Roger. Kandahar Tower. Hercules 27 is ready to copy vectors. These guys really need this medical equipment. For the next 8 minutes, Jessica watched the weather radar with laser focus. The precipitation cell was moving exactly as she'd predicted, and the wind data showed the crosswind component dropping slightly as the storm's center passed to the north. Henderson, she said, we're coming up on our window. Visibility should start improving in 90 seconds. Henderson nodded and keyed his microphone. Hercules 27. Turn left. Heading 275. Descend and maintain 3,000 feet. Vectors for runway 29 approach. Left 275, down to 3,000, Hercules 27. Jessica watched the aircraft's radar return as it began its descent. On her weather screen, the precipitation was definitely weakening. This might actually work. Visibility improving to half a mile, reported the weather station. Hercules 27, turn left heading 250, continue descent to 2,000 feet. The C-130 was now on a perfect intercept course for the runway approach path. Jessica could see on radar that the pilot was flying precise headings and maintaining exact altitudes. Captain Sullivan was definitely earning his reputation as a skilled aviator. Weather station reports visibility 3/4 of a mile and improving, came the update. Henderson looked at Jessica, who nodded. This was it. Hercules 27, turn left heading 240, contact tower on frequency 128.3 for final approach clearance. Left 240, switching to tower, Hercules 27. Thanks for the vectors. As the C-130 switched to the tower frequency for final approach clearance, Jessica felt a mix of relief and anticipation. They'd gotten the aircraft positioned perfectly for landing, but the most challenging part was still ahead. Getting a large cargo plane safely on the ground in marginal weather conditions required skill, experience, and just a little bit of luck. Rodriguez appeared beside her station. "Good work on the weather analysis, Chen. But remember, this was a team effort. Henderson made the control decisions." "Understood, Sergeant." But as Jessica watched the C-130's radar return line up with the runway centerline, she felt something she hadn't experienced before. Not just satisfaction at doing her job well, but the knowledge that she'd seen something others had missed, had trusted her analysis enough to speak up, and had been right. The radio crackled with the tower controller's voice. "Hercules 27. Cleared to land runway 29. Winds 270 at 28 knots. Visibility 3/4 of a mile." Through the tower's windows, Jessica could just make out the C-130's landing lights, cutting through the rain and fog. The aircraft was slightly right of centerline, correcting for the crosswind exactly as it should. The pilot was doing everything right. Then she saw it. A sudden gust of wind caught the aircraft just as it crossed the runway threshold. The C-130 drifted left, and for a heart-stopping moment, it looked like it might go off the side of the runway. But Captain Sullivan's experience showed. The aircraft's nose came around. The main landing gear touched down smoothly, and the C-130 rolled out straight down the centerline. "Hercules 27 is down and safe," came the tower controller's voice. The control room erupted in quiet applause. The kind of professional acknowledgement that happened when a difficult job was done well by everyone involved. Rodriguez turned to Jessica. "Chen, that was solid weather analysis. But you need to understand something. This kind of decision-making comes with responsibility. If that crew had gotten into trouble, if someone had been hurt, we all would have carried that weight." Jessica nodded, but she was thinking about something else entirely. For months, she'd been treated as the junior person who needed supervision and couldn't handle challenging situations. Today, she'd proven that experience wasn't just about years on the job. It was about understanding your equipment, trusting your analysis, and having the courage to speak up when you saw something others missed. An hour later, as the storm system moved off and normal flight operations resumed, Jessica was still thinking about those crucial few minutes. She'd helped save critical medical supplies for wounded soldiers, had guided a skilled crew through dangerous conditions, and had earned a level of respect from her colleagues that she'd been working toward for months. But more importantly, she'd discovered something about herself. When the situation demanded precision, when lives depended on getting things exactly right, she could deliver. The question now was whether her supervisors would remember this the next time challenging conditions arose, or whether she'd be back to routine traffic control while the senior controllers handled anything remotely difficult. As she prepared to end her shift, Jessica made a quiet decision. She wouldn't wait for the next emergency to prove herself. She'd continue studying weather patterns, learning aircraft capabilities, and preparing for the day when someone's life might depend on her ability to see solutions that others missed. That day would come sooner than she expected. 3 weeks after the storm incident, Jessica had settled back into routine operations, but something fundamental had changed. The other controllers still treated her as junior staff, but there was a subtle difference in how they listened when she spoke about weather patterns or aircraft performance. It wasn't quite respect yet, but it was recognition. "Chen, you're on approach control today," Master Sergeant Rodriguez announced during the morning briefing. "We've got heavy traffic expected. Supply runs from Kuwait, medevac rotation from Germany, and a special operations flight that's been delayed twice due to mechanical issues." Jessica nodded, taking her position at the radar scope. Approach control was more complex than tower operations. She'd be managing multiple aircraft at different altitudes and speeds, sequencing them for safe landings while maintaining proper separation. It was exactly the kind of challenging assignment she'd been hoping for. The first few hours passed smoothly. Jessica guided cargo planes, transport helicopters, and fighter jets through their approaches with growing confidence. Her weather analysis from the storm incident had taught her to look beyond the obvious, to see patterns that others might miss. Kandahar approach, Dustoff 7-3, requesting priority handling for medical emergency. Jessica immediately recognized the call sign. Dust-off flights were medical evacuations, and priority handling meant someone's life was on the line. Dust-off 73, Kandahar approach. Say your position and nature of emergency. Kandahar approach, Dust-off 73, is a UA-60 Black Hawk, 15 miles northeast, carrying critical patient with traumatic brain injury. We need immediate approach and landing clearance. Jessica quickly assessed her traffic situation. She had 2 cargo planes already in the pattern, and a fighter jet requesting practice approaches. Under normal circumstances, she'd have to sequence the medical helicopter behind the existing traffic, but priority handling changed everything. Dust-off 73, Roger, understand medical emergency. Turn left, heading 270. Descend and maintain 2,000 feet. Number 1, for landing. All other aircraft, expect delay vectors. The cargo planes and fighter jet acknowledged without complaint. Everyone understood that medical emergencies took absolute priority. Jessica began rerouting the other aircraft to create a clear approach path for the helicopter. Approach, Dust-off 73. We appreciate the priority handling. Patient is critical, and we're running low on fuel due to extended search and rescue operations. Low fuel. That complicated things significantly. Jessica pulled up the helicopter's flight plan and calculated fuel consumption rates. The UA-60 had been airborne for nearly 4 hours, well beyond normal mission duration. Henderson, she called to the senior controller at the adjacent station. Dust-off 73 is reporting fuel issues. Should I coordinate with emergency services? Henderson glanced at her screen. How low are they talking? Before Jessica could respond, the helicopter pilot's voice crackled through with barely controlled tension. Kandahar approach. Dust-off 73, declaring fuel emergency. We have approximately 8 minutes of fuel remaining. The control room went quiet. Fuel emergency declarations changed everything. Jessica now had absolute priority over all other traffic, but she also had a ticking clock counting down to potential disaster. Dust-off 73, Roger, fuel emergency. You are cleared direct to the airfield. Maintain 2,000 feet. Contact tower on frequency 128.3 immediately. Direct to field, switching tower, Dust-off 73. Jessica turned to Henderson. Should I notify the crash rescue teams? Already done. Rodriguez's voice came from behind her. Emergency vehicles are rolling. How did you handle the spacing? Rerouted the cargo traffic to extended downwind, sent the fighter jet to the holding pattern at 5,000 feet. Dust-off has a clear approach path. Rodriguez nodded approvingly. Good thinking. That helicopter crew has been pushing hard all day. 3rd medical evacuation since dawn. As Jessica watched the helicopter's radar return approach the airfield, she felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with high-stakes situations. Every decision mattered when lives were on the line, and there was no room for hesitation or second-guessing. The tower controller's voice came through the intercom system. Dust-off 73 is on final approach, landing assured. Relief washed through the control room. Another successful emergency, another life potentially saved because the air traffic control system had worked exactly as designed. But Jessica's relief was short-lived. Her radar screen showed a new contact approaching from the northwest, a large, slow-moving aircraft that appeared to be having difficulties maintaining altitude. Kandahar approach, Goliath 46 requesting immediate assistance. Jessica recognized the call sign immediately. Goliath flights were C-130 Hercules transports, the massive 4-engine cargo planes that formed the backbone of military airlift operations. But something in the pilot's voice set off alarm bells. Goliath 46, Kandahar approach, go ahead. Kandahar approach. We have experienced engine failure on engine number 2 and are having difficulty maintaining altitude. Request vectors to the nearest suitable airfield and emergency equipment standing by. Engine failure on a C-130 was serious, but not necessarily catastrophic. The aircraft was designed to fly on 3 engines, but Jessica's radar showed the aircraft's altitude decreasing steadily, which suggested more serious problems. Goliath 46. What is your current altitude and souls on board? Currently passing through 8,500 feet, unable to maintain level flight. We have 22 souls on board and are carrying humanitarian supplies for refugee camps. Jessica's fingers flew across her keyboard, calculating distance to alternate airfields and rates of descent. Kandahar was definitely the closest option, but she needed more information about the aircraft's capabilities. Goliath 46. Confirm you are able to maintain controlled flight and execute approach procedures. There was a pause that lasted too long. When the pilot's voice returned, Jessica could hear strain and something that might have been fear. Kandahar approach. We are experiencing control difficulties due to hydraulic system problems related to the engine failure. We can maintain general heading control, but precision approaches may be challenging. Hydraulic problems. That changed everything. The C-130's flight controls, landing gear, and flaps all depended on hydraulic systems. Without full hydraulic power, the aircraft became much more difficult to control, especially during the precise flying required for landing approaches. Chen, Henderson said quietly, you need to get Rodriguez over here. This is beyond routine emergency procedures. But Rodriguez was already approaching her station, having heard the radio communications. Chen, what's the aircraft's current status? Engine failure on number 2, hydraulic problems affecting flight controls, 22 people on board, and they're losing altitude steadily. Current position is 30 miles northwest, but they're having trouble maintaining precise headings. Rodriguez studied her radar screen. Rate of descent. Jessica had been monitoring that carefully. Approximately 200 feet per minute. At that rate, they have maybe 15 minutes before they reach minimum safe altitude for terrain clearance. Options for alternate airfields? Kabul is 90 miles northeast, but with their control problems and rate of descent, I don't think they can make it. Kandahar is their best option, but we need to get them lined up quickly. Rodriguez nodded grimly. Clear all other traffic out of the area. This C-130 gets absolute priority. As Jessica began issuing instructions to other aircraft to clear the airspace, she was already formulating an approach plan in her mind. The key would be getting the damaged aircraft lined up with the runway as quickly as possible, minimizing the amount of precise flying required from a crew dealing with degraded controls. Goliath 46. Kandahar approach. We are clearing all traffic from your area and will provide direct vectors to runway 29. Are you able to accept heading instructions? Affirmative. Kandahar. We can follow general heading instructions, but our response time is slower than normal due to control issues. That was exactly what Jessica had been hoping to hear. If the crew could follow headings, she could guide them to the runway even with impaired controls. Goliath 46, turn left heading 180. Begin descent to 5,000 feet. We will provide constant heading updates to keep you aligned with the approach course. Left 180, down to 5,000, Goliath 46. For the next several minutes, Jessica provided a steady stream of small heading corrections, watching the C-130's radar return gradually align with the runway centerline. The pilot was doing an impressive job maintaining control despite the aircraft's problems. Chen, Rodriguez said quietly, you're doing good work. Keep them coming. But Jessica was already thinking ahead to the next challenge. Getting the aircraft lined up was only half the battle. They still had to execute a landing with damaged flight controls and potentially compromised landing gear systems. Goliath 46. You are now 15 miles from the runway, aligned with the approach course. Contact tower on frequency 128.3 for landing clearance. Be advised, emergency equipment is standing by. Switching to tower, Goliath 46. Thanks for the vectors. Approach. As the C-130 switched frequencies, Jessica felt the familiar mixture of relief and continued concern. She'd successfully guided the damaged aircraft to the runway approach, but the most dangerous part was still ahead. Through the tower windows, she could see emergency vehicles positioned along the runway. Fire trucks, ambulances, and crash recovery equipment, all standing ready in case things went wrong. Tower, Goliath 46 requesting landing clearance. Be advised we have hydraulic problems and may require extended rollout distance. The tower controller's voice was calm and professional. Goliath 4-6, cleared to land runway 29. Wind calm. Emergency equipment is standing by. Take all the runway you need. Jessica watched through binoculars as the C-130 appeared through the afternoon haze, noticeably lower and slower than normal. The aircraft was clearly struggling, but the pilot was maintaining control. As the massive cargo plane crossed the runway threshold, Jessica held her breath. The landing looked normal at first. Main gear touching down smoothly. Nose gear following a few seconds later. But then she saw the problem. The aircraft was drifting to the right side of the runway, the pilot struggling to maintain directional control with damaged flight systems. The C-130 was decelerating, but slowly, and the runway wasn't infinite. Emergency vehicles are rolling, someone announced. But even as Jessica watched the fire trucks racing toward the runway, she could see that the pilot was gradually regaining control. The aircraft's drift stopped, and it began tracking straight down the center line again. Goliath 4-6 is down and safe, came the tower controller's voice. The control room erupted in quiet cheers. Another emergency successfully handled, another crew and passengers brought home safely. Rodriguez appeared beside Jessica's station. Outstanding work, Chen. Your approach vectors were exactly what they needed. Jessica felt a surge of pride, but also something else. A growing confidence that she could handle whatever challenges came her way. Today had proven that her quick thinking during the storm 3 weeks ago wasn't a fluke. She was genuinely good at this job. Sergeant Rodriguez, she said. I'd like to volunteer for more emergency situations. I think I'm ready for additional responsibilities. Rodriguez studied her for a moment. Chen, emergency situations aren't something you volunteer for. They find you when you're ready for them. As if summoned by his words, the radio crackled with a new emergency call. This one from an aircraft type that would test every skill Jessica had learned and push her abilities to their absolute limits. Kandahar approach, Stingray 1-1, declaring aircraft emergency. Jessica looked at her supervisor questioningly. Stingray call signs were used by special operations aircraft, the kind of flights that operated under different rules and faced different kinds of dangers. Rodriguez nodded grimly. Take the call, Chen. Let's see what they need. The special operations call sign sent a chill through the control room. Stingray flights operated in the most dangerous areas, carried the most sensitive cargo, and faced threats that conventional aircraft never encountered. When they declared emergencies, it was serious. Stingray 1-1, Kandahar approach, state your emergency. Jessica responded, her voice steady despite the sudden tension. Kandahar approach, Stingray 1-1, is a C-130, returning from classified mission. We have taken enemy fire and sustained significant damage. Aircraft is controllable, but we have wounded crew members and critical systems failures. Enemy fire. Jessica's blood ran cold. This wasn't a mechanical failure or weather emergency. This was combat damage. And that meant the situation could deteriorate rapidly and unpredictably. Stingray 1-1, copy enemy fire and crew injuries. What is your current position and status of flight controls? Currently 40 miles northwest of your position, maintaining level flight at 6,000 feet. Primary flight controls are functioning, but we have lost most hydraulic pressure. Engine number 4 is running rough and may need to be shut down. We have one crew member seriously wounded and need immediate medical attention upon landing. Rodriguez appeared beside Jessica's station. His expression grim. Special operations flights operated under different protocols, and combat damage created complications that normal emergency procedures didn't cover. Chen, I'm taking this one, Rodriguez said, reaching for her headset. But before he could take control, the radio crackled again with increasing urgency. Kandahar approach, Stingray 1-1. Be advised we now have complete hydraulic failure. Repeat, complete hydraulic failure. We are having difficulty maintaining control and need immediate approach vectors. Complete hydraulic failure on a C-130 was catastrophic. Without hydraulics, the crew would lose flight controls, landing gear operation, and flap control. The aircraft would become increasingly difficult to fly as they slowed down for landing. Stingray 11, Kandahar approach. Understand complete hydraulic failure. Are you declaring an emergency? Affirmative. Declaring aircraft emergency. We need emergency equipment standing by, and approach vectors immediately. Our wounded crew member is the co-pilot, and the pilot is struggling to control the aircraft alone. Jessica's mind raced. A single pilot trying to control a battle-damaged C-130 without hydraulic assistance, while his co-pilot was wounded and unable to help. This was beyond anything she'd trained for. Rodriguez, she said urgently, they need constant radar guidance. The pilot can't look at charts or navigation instruments if he's fighting to control the aircraft manually. Rodriguez nodded and keyed his microphone, but Jessica noticed his hands were trembling slightly. Even the experienced master sergeant was feeling the pressure of this situation. Stingray 11, turn left heading 160, descend and maintain 4,000 feet. We are clearing all traffic from your approach path. The response came back immediately. But something was wrong with the pilot's voice. It was strained, exhausted, and carried undertones of barely controlled panic. Left 160, down to 4,000, but I need to advise. Pilot is having medical issues due to loss of pressurization from battle damage. I'm the flight engineer, the Light 6120, and I've never landed this aircraft before. The control room went dead silent. The pilot was incapacitated, the co-pilot was wounded, and the person flying the damaged C-130 was a flight engineer with no landing experience. This had just become a disaster in progress. Flight engineer? Rodriguez asked Jessica quietly. Can a flight engineer land a C-130? Jessica's mind raced through everything she knew about C-130 crew positions. Flight engineers understood aircraft systems better than anyone, but they weren't trained pilots. However, they did sit behind the pilot during flight operations and observed landing procedures on every mission. Stingray 11. Rodriguez transmitted. Understand flight engineer is now flying the aircraft. What is your pilot training background? Onray 1. Onray 1. I have approximately 100 hours in small civilian aircraft, but I've never landed anything this size. I've observed C-130 landing procedures hundreds of times, but I need guidance through every step. Rodriguez looked at Jessica. Chen, you know these aircraft better than anyone here. You've studied their approach speeds, landing configurations, everything. I need you to talk this flight engineer through a landing. Jessica felt her heart stop. Rodriguez was asking her to save not just an aircraft and crew, but to do it by guiding someone through procedures she'd only read about in technical manuals. The responsibility was overwhelming. Sergeant, I've never actually landed an aircraft. I understand the procedures, but talking someone through it. I'm Chen, Rodriguez said quietly. You're the only person here who has studied C-130 systems in enough detail to guide him through this. Henderson knows general procedures, but you know the specific speeds, power settings, and configurations. That crew is depending on us. Jessica looked at the radar screen showing Stingray 11's position, then at the faces of every controller in the room. They were all looking at her with expressions that mixed hope with desperation. She took a deep breath and reached for her microphone. Stingray 11, Kandahar approach. I'm Senior Airman Chen, and I'm going to guide you through this landing step by step. What is your current airspeed and altitude? Thank you, ma'am. Currently showing 200 knots indicated airspeed at 4,000 feet. Aircraft feels heavy and sluggish without hydraulic assist. Roger. That's normal without hydraulic boost. First thing, we need to configure for landing approach. Do you have manual reversion for flight controls? Affirmative. I found the manual reversion handles and engaged them. Controls are very heavy, but responsive. Jessica closed her eyes for a moment, visualizing the C-130's manual reversion system. Without hydraulics, the flight controls connected directly to mechanical cables, requiring much more physical strength but maintaining controllability. Outstanding. Now, we need to reduce power and begin descent. Pull power back gradually to about 70% on all operating engines. Your target airspeed is 160 knots. Reducing power. Targeting 160 knots. Perfect. Now, we need to get your landing gear extended. The gear will have to be lowered manually without hydraulics. There should be emergency gear extension handles near your engineer panel. I see them. Red handles labeled emergency gear extension? That's correct. Pull all 3 handles: nose, left main, right main. The gear will free fall into position, and you should feel the aircraft drag increase significantly. For a tense minute, Jessica listened to the sounds of mechanical systems operating through the radio. Finally, the flight engineer's voice came back. Gear appears to be down and locked, green lights showing on all 3 positions. Excellent work. Now we need to deal with flaps. Without hydraulics, you'll need to use the manual flap system. Set flaps to 50% extension. Jessica was drawing on every technical manual she'd studied, every conversation she'd had with C-130 pilots about emergency procedures. The flight engineer was doing remarkably well, but the hardest part was still ahead. Stingray 11, you are now 8 miles from the runway. Turn left heading 145 for final approach course. Begin descent to 2,000 feet. Left 145, down to 2,000. Through binoculars, Jessica could now see the cone 130 inches the distance, much lower and slower than normal, but maintaining reasonable control. The flight engineer was proving that understanding aircraft systems could partly compensate for lack of piloting experience. Stingray 11, you're looking good on final approach. Target airspeed is 120 knots over the runway threshold. That will feel very slow, but trust your instruments. Copy 120 knots. Ma'am, I can see the runway now, but it looks like I'm coming in too high and fast. Jessica felt a spike of adrenaline. High and fast approaches were dangerous in any aircraft, but especially critical in a damaged one with limited control authority. Stingray 11, reduce power slightly and add some nose-down trim. The aircraft will want to balloon without hydraulic assistance, so you need to stay ahead of it. Reducing power, adding nose-down trim. Jessica watched through binoculars as the C-130 adjusted its approach angle. The flight engineer was learning to fly by doing, and remarkably, he was succeeding. Stingray 11, you are now 3 miles from touchdown. Looking good on glide path. Keep your current power setting and prepare for ground contact. Remember, the aircraft will want to bounce without hydraulic damping in the landing gear. Copy. Preparing for touchdown. When you cross the runway threshold, begin pulling power back to idle and raise the nose slightly. Don't try to force it onto the ground. Let it settle naturally. Through the tower windows, Jessica could see the massive cargo plane approaching the runway. Emergency vehicles were positioned along both sides, their lights flashing in the afternoon sun. Stingray 11, you are over the threshold now. Power to idle. Ease back on the controls. Let it settle. The C-130 crossed the runway numbers, and Jessica held her breath. The aircraft looked stable. But landing is the moment when everything can go wrong in seconds. The main landing gear touched the runway with a solid thump, followed immediately by the nose gear. But instead of rolling straight, the aircraft began drifting to the left side of the runway. Left rudder, Jessica called. Counter the drift with rudder pressure. Applying left rudder, but the controls are so heavy. The C-130 straightened out and began tracking down the center line, but it was decelerating slowly. Without hydraulic assist, the normal wheel brakes would be much less effective. Stingray 11, you can use reverse thrust if needed. Pull the power levers back through the detent into reverse range. Roger. Engaging reverse thrust. Jessica could see the engine exhaust patterns change as the flight engineer activated reverse thrust. The aircraft's deceleration rate increased immediately. Stingray 11, you are down and safe. Excellent work. Emergency vehicles are approaching to assist with your wounded crew members. As the C-130 came to a complete stop on the runway, Jessica realized she was shaking. She'd just talked a non-pilot through landing a battle-damaged aircraft, and somehow it had worked. The control room erupted in cheers and applause. Controllers from other positions gathered around Jessica's station, offering congratulations and amazement at what they'd just witnessed. "Chen," Rodriguez said, his voice filled with something Jessica had never heard before: genuine respect. "That was the most impressive piece of air traffic control I've seen in 20 years. You saved that crew's lives." But Jessica was thinking about something else entirely. 6 months ago, she'd been the junior controller who couldn't be trusted with challenging weather. Today, she'd guided a non-pilot through landing a combat-damaged aircraft, using nothing but her knowledge of procedures and her ability to remain calm under pressure. An hour later, as emergency crews completed their work with the wounded crew members, the flight engineer from Stingray 11 appeared in the control tower. He was a young staff sergeant, probably not much older than Jessica, with grease stains on his flight suit and exhaustion in his eyes. "Ma'am," he said, walking directly to Jessica's station, "I wanted to thank you personally. You saved our lives up there." "You did all the hard work," Jessica replied. "You flew that aircraft. I just provided guidance. Ma'am, with respect, I would never have been able to figure out the approach speeds, power settings, and landing configuration on my own. Your knowledge of our aircraft systems made the difference between getting home safely and—" He didn't finish the sentence. But Jessica understood. As the flight engineer left to rejoin his crew, Rodriguez approached Jessica's station one final time. "Chen, effective immediately. You're cleared for all emergency operations. Weather, mechanical failures, combat damage. Whatever comes up, you're qualified to handle it." Jessica nodded, but she was already thinking about her next shift, her next challenge, her next opportunity to prove that competence and knowledge could overcome any situation. Looking out at the runway where the damaged C-130 sat surrounded by emergency vehicles, Jessica realized that she'd finally found her place. Not as the junior controller who needed supervision, but as the person others turned to when the impossible became necessary. They had told her to stay put in the tower, to let others handle the difficult situations. Today, she had personally brought a cone 130 inches for landing, and in doing so, she had saved lives and proven that expertise earned through study and dedication could be just as valuable as experience earned through years on the job. As her shift ended and the tower prepared for evening operations, Jessica made a quiet promise to herself. She would continue learning, continue studying, continue preparing for whatever emergency might arise, because now she knew that when lives depended on air traffic control, she was ready to deliver exactly the performance those lives deserved.